Okay, great. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to the July 28th, 2022 special meeting of the Park City Council. It's 2:30 in the afternoon, and all council members are present. We have 4 here with us in the chambers, and Council Member Dickey is joining us virtually today. So we'll move right into our discussion items and start out with landscape reduction incentive program.
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and Council. I'm Jason Christensen, Water Resources Manager for Park City. And with me, I have Clint McAfee, Public Utilities Director. Today we're going to talk about a landscaping incentive program for Park City. And basically, I'm really interested in hearing Council's feedback to help us craft a more concrete proposal for this landscape incentive program. But I have a presentation I can run through if that's all right with you.
Sure.
All right, so kind of the goal, starting out with the goal of the presentation, a high-level overview of a Park City landscape incentive, or just kind of an outline of what landscaping rebate incentive programs are out there, what the city could potentially do, and understanding Council's goals towards 4 specific items in there. An idea of, I guess, first off, just whether Council's interested in pursuing this further. And assuming they are, an idea of an incentive amount, the total incentive to make available per year, talk about funding options to provide that incentive, and then talk about a level of process that the city would like to see associated with that effort. And then the goal is at the end of this presentation for us to return with a more defined proposal based on Council's goals for you to review as far as potentially offering a landscaping incentive. So before we dive too far into that, I just wanted to touch base on Park City's conservation program. We continue to see a phenomenal response from the community in terms of water conservation. And I think it's just important to highlight that the community has responded and they are doing the right thing. And a program like this could further incentivize conservation and remove some barriers towards additional conservation desire that may be out there, but it's just limited by the cost of making those big changes like re-landscaping. So around a 50% reduction in water demand per single family residential house since the year 2000. Similar reductions for multifamily and irrigation accounts. We've talked about this before. Commercial accounts are kind of the one outlier where we see a slight increase over that. There are reasons for that, good or bad, but one of the major reasons is just an increase in the scale of commercial activity in Park City and the number of customers these businesses are serving. It's also important to share our water supply. So this is a graph you've seen before. It just talks about the blue line at the bottom is peak day demand for the city. So we design our water system for peak day demand. And that's the highest demand day that occurs throughout the year. There are 2 lines. The blue one is just culinary treated drinking water. It's what comes out of the faucet when you turn it on. And the red line adds all of our secondary water demands onto that. Things like golf courses, other raw water demands that the city has an obligation to provide. As you can see from the graph, we are operating with a decent margin of safety right now. And that margin is significant enough that the city has chosen to enter into surplus water agreements with Weber Basin. That's represented by that green peak on the red line. That's a rolling 5-year commitment. I think a conversation will come to council later this year to see if there's a desire to extend that for an additional year, keeping with that rolling 5-year window. All right, so now diving into a landscaping incentive. So what is a landscaping incentive? It's basically money, typically money, sometimes plants that are given to a customer in exchange for them converting turf grass into xeric landscaping. And xeric is a weird word. Sometimes we hear it called xeroscaping. And in the industry, xeric means either a native plant or a plant that can survive in our climate with limited supplemental irrigation. Xeriscaping is sometimes defined as gravel without vegetative cover. Vegetative cover is important for a lot of reasons. You don't want to go. You probably don't want to go to a gravel front yard. It creates heat island problems. It creates storm water infiltration problems. But there are really attractive landscapings that can be created with these native or low water use plants. And so, that is what the landscaping incentive program is. We'll spend a little bit of time on this slide. I hope it's readable. But I pulled this out of one of the articles that was linked in the staff report. It's the best compilation that I've seen of all the communities that are currently offering landscaping incentives. It provides you a good overview of what options are available out there. And it also kind of shows the bookends. And the top bookend is Southern Nevada Water Authority. They kind of created the first landscaping rebate program over 20 years ago now. They also offer, to my knowledge, the highest rebate amount at $3 per square foot. There are some reductions for really large properties where they kind of crank down on that a little bit. And then you have other programs like Flagstaff, Arizona, which let's do Tempe, Arizona, actually, on the other end of that, that's offering kind of a nominal 25 cents per square foot of turf removed. All these programs operate off a square foot of turf. That's kind of the metric that's used to assign your rebate value for your conversion, whether that conversion is happening in single family residential, commercial, a large HOA irrigated area, something like that. And then another important data point for council is, what does it cost to take turf out of a landscape, an established landscape? And that is a really difficult question for us to answer because it depends so much on what's currently installed, what the level of effort that customer, that resident wants to put into their landscaping, their maintenance desires, their vegetation desires. But we thought the best approach to kind of giving you some goalposts for that would be to reach out to local landscaping companies and ask them, what would you charge for a landscape conversion on a square foot basis? And we gave them 3 kind of tiers of effort. The first tier of effort maybe wouldn't even be land management code compliant, but it was just the idea you round up everything in the yard or you put black plastic over that, you kill that turf, and then you put in the minimum amount of vegetation required by our LMC. At that level of effort, what do you think you would charge a customer per square foot? That ranged from $1 to $6 per square foot, depending on the landscaper. Tier 2 was an average level of effort, something nice, something a little more thought out. That ranged from $2 to $7 per square foot. And then a high-end proposal, something fancy and I guess high-end. And that ranged from $5 to $9 per square foot. It's important to note that all of these quotes had limitations. The landscaper wasn't talking about making modifications to the irrigation system, which is going to be expensive. It's really tough to ballpark that because each irrigation system is different. Some will need to be replaced. Some could be modified. It also didn't include some of the dollar amounts that we got didn't include the purchase of large trees or trees to go into the yard, things like that. Sure.
On a program like this, I know for some rebate programs you have to work with like a professional service provider. Is this a kind of program when you talk about these landscapers that to receive the rebates, if it was something that you put into effect, that you would have to use a professional landscaper, or would the program be available to people who did the work by themselves as well?
Yeah, so you could make that a requirement. I don't think staff would recommend that. Like the Flagstaff, Arizona example that I dug into, they basically required a sketch that the homeowner could do and then a visit with city staff out on the property. I don't, as far as the rebate requirements, I don't think we would need to require that.
Question on 1A. So are you saying, when you say Roundup, are you talking about round up the poison, or are you talking about round them up, like collect?
Round up the poison, so an herbicide to kill the lawn, or black plastic to solarize the lawn. So minimum level of effort there is what we were talking. And so I'm not recommending that to
Okay.
anyone, but I
Just like the word Roundup, I'm like,
I do think there's a real, I mean, some residential customers would probably take that approach to removing their lawn.
Well, not to dwell on this, but I mean, we could make a condition of a rebate or an elevated rebate, doing it in a less impactful way to the environment, right? I mean, we could say.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And so next up is program funding. I realize this is a lot of information on a slide here in table format, but I'd like to walk through, first off, starting with a couple of caveats. The first column is a green. The green column would be the rate increase necessary to fund the program. We're not suggesting that you would want to maybe just do across the board 5% rate increase, but it gives you an idea of kind of the level of impact to ratepayers if you wanted to offer an incentive of the 5% is around $1 million. There'll be some decrease in available funding because there will be overhead with this program. That overhead we don't have a clear picture on yet because it'll depend on some of these policy conversations we're having about what restrictions we want to put in place, and the level of effort you want staff to put into making sure those restrictions are followed. But just for conversation, so a 5% rate increase gets you just shy of $1 million in the incentive that could be offered. At $5 per square foot, that's 188,000 square feet that could be removed. I have a really hard time with spatial reasoning, and I could tell you what that looks like. So I put that in acres as well. So it's about 4 acres of turf grass that would be removed, or benefit offered for removal of that level of turf grass. I don't know that you need to dig into any of these numbers, but beyond that point to the right in the table is just the impact that we project that would have on water demand, the cost savings for avoided costs for the utility, and the value under the Weber Basin contract. That value under the Weber Basin contract requires a little more conversation just because that value is only realized if Weber Basin asks for exactly the amount of water that we saved with this landscaping incentive. And, you know, if they ask for more, there's a likelihood Park City can't provide that, and we need to stop providing surplus water to Weber Basin. If they ask for less, then we already had some surplus available, so we're not recapturing that value under the Weber Basin contract. But it's an important variable just to take a look at, appreciating that it may not be fully captured, but pieces of it could be captured over time. And another caveat there, that's 6 years out before the next renewal. And so it would be somewhat difficult to project today the actual impact of a landscape incentive program 6 years in the future. We can model it, we can provide some guesses, but this is new to staff, so I'm sure those models won't be perfectly accurate.
So so I'm clear, so this like 5% would be for all customers and it would be on top of the 3%?
That is correct, yes.
Wow. Okay.
And you could choose to, in the staff report, we talked about different policy choices you could make about how to apply that. So you could apply that 5% just to the highest 50% and higher users. So that would be a 10% increase on them, plus that 3% across the board. But that 3%, that inflationary increase, which to date has been 3%, we will calculate that again next budget cycle, would be additional. Any other questions on this table? So I guess just highlighting again some of the points I hope I've made. The cost of landscaping is going to vary customer to customer. The program funding that I provided is a ballpark estimate at this point. We will sharpen our pencils once we hear from council on some policy feedback here. And staff is recommending kind of an incremental ramp up of this program. Because this is a new program for the community. It's kind of new to the state of Utah as well. I think we'd recommend that ramp up so that we can gather actual data on how much these renovations are costing customers, how popular this incentive is, and variables like that.
Is there a max amount that's being proposed, or do you know like what the average expected rebate would be?
So the best data I have goes back to this table. I didn't average it. Some communities approached it differently. They were just offering bill credits. They were offering free plants. They were capping the incentive pretty small at $500 max. So it's tough to find an average. I'd say Southern Nevada Water Authority at $3 is still an outlier. That's a very generous rebate. My gut tells me average is around $1, but that's a gut take, not a mathematical calculation. Yeah, if council has any thoughts on either incentive amount or rate increase that you wouldn't want to cross over.
Yeah, for me, it seems like when I was first thinking about this, I was hoping that it would help our, perhaps our seniors and other lower income families to be able to do this. But if we're going to increase their water rate, 8 to 10%, I'm not sure that accomplishes what I was thinking about. Are there any federal dollars to help with this kind of thing?
I have not seen any federal dollars. There is a state program that's still in development. They're anticipating releasing the rules on that this fall, and that'll open up $5 million of state funding. It's unclear at this time who's going to be available for that and what the incentive is going to look like. But there is a state program that is out there and being developed right now.
Tana?
Yeah, just a couple questions. So do you have an idea on an estimate of how much square footage someone actually has in their yard? Do we know that? Like, I'm sure it totally depends on neighborhoods, but is there an average? I mean,
So at a policy level in our residential rate structure, we targeted a desired amount of 1/10 of an acre of turf in a yard, and the rate structure didn't become really punitive until someone had more than 1/4 of an acre of turf grass. As to the average yard in Park City, I could run some numbers and see what I could get to. It is going to vary a whole lot based on neighborhood. Prospector's water demand profile is a lot different than the Thames Canyon water demand profile.
okay. And then I guess my other question, I read that Tribune article this week that came out about what they're doing in South Jordan, and they had put a number to it. So I believe what they said is they wanted to go from 199 gallons per day to 187.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was how they were going to, I guess, start this program. And I know that they're going way more into it than what we're proposing right now. On the same side, I saw that Vegas, Southern Nevada is at 86 gallons. So, I mean, I think there's this huge difference of what we want to propose. So do you think it makes more sense for us to choose a percentage of water we would like people to stay at? Or does it make more sense to just pick a number that we want to go with? Does that make sense?
Will you outline the two options for me again?
So I guess I'm asking, do you think it makes sense for us to do something similar to what South Jordan is doing, where they said their goal is to get all of their customers from 199 gallons per day to 187, and I think it's by 2026. So whatever they could do to get to that point? Or would it make more sense if we say, we just want to put $1 million into this or $100,000? So that's my thought is, do we want to have a number where we say, yes, that's where we're going?
Are you asking about total usage for a residential property? Or are you talking about landscaping and cash for grass?
This is their total use of the day. So that's what I'm asking. If we, so this was their
It's per person,
per person,
gallons per person
gallon
per
per person per day.
day, or gallons per capita day is a common metric to use in water conservation. It's also a difficult metric to use in general. So Nevada's numbers are great. And one of the things they're doing is all the water that they put in back into Lake Mead, so all their sewer return flows, they count that as a credit, and that drives down the consumption that they use. Jordan Valley doesn't do that right now. Park City is especially difficult just given our second homeowner community and how we don't have a population, but we still have these homes that maybe don't add to our official population count, but still have a yard, still require water. I think I would recommend, I go back to that incremental walk into this. If council is interested in this, let's take a small step towards it. And then let's step back and evaluate and see if we want to set a target and see what the community's response is to that smaller incentive.
I'll just add on the gallons per capita per day. This is one program that we can use to drive that number down. You know, this isn't the only tool. You know, we can put pressure and positive messaging, you know, both carrot and stick, I guess, measures at reducing that number. So I don't think you need to look at getting that reduction purely from a landscape reduction program.
So if you look at the next discussion, which is the proposed rate structure, and it says, you know, for like a top family, the difference would actually be like -3%, or for a medium-sized residential, it would be -35% in fees, and then for like the unoccupied homes, it's like a -36% for low water usage. I'm wondering, how does that play out with these numbers? So if we're thinking that, you know, a single family home in our community, if we adjust our water conservation rates, that they be paying less anyways by 35%, and then you just add 3% on top. So does that mean that they would average out paying less, still 32% less than they are now? So really, it's just absorbed into the new conservation rates for the most part.
For single family residential, I think that's right. And I think, so our goal with the rate proposal that we'll be talking about next is that it's revenue neutral, so that we're not collecting any additional revenue from that. And there are customers who are going to see a discount, and there are customers who are going to see a rate increase to make that possible. The goal behind that is that conservation incentive. Council could definitely ask us to modify that proposal and move it from revenue neutral to funding X dollars for a landscaping incentive program. That will change the numbers. But yeah, sure.
But even so, it doesn't really, to some degree, for most of the payers. I know for the large luxury resorts, and some of them have quite a bit of grass up there and could probably participate in these programs, but they're also, you know, a lot of their water reduction usage would probably be through hotels or showers and toilets and other things like that. But for like most of our residents in town, the cost of this program would just be absorbed in that difference of the water rate changes.
It could be structured that way.
So they're not going to see like an 8% increase. They're actually going to see, if we could elevate it by, you know, 3%, and then their rates would still go down overall 32%.
Net even. Yeah, we could definitely.
Net even, still a loss, it looks like, based on what you're showing.
Yeah, we definitely could get that policy direction. And for single family residential, which across the board is experiencing a decrease, yeah, they could move from across the board, they're experiencing a smaller decrease. And that is going to fund part of this program or all of this program, depending on direction.
Ryan, welcome. You're on mute.
Thank you. Hey guys, one of the question marks I have about these programs, and it's mostly due to irrigation costs being excluded from the target of the cost per square foot. Like irrigation is usually the biggest cost line in xeriscaping, from what I've seen. And so one of the question marks I have about programs like these is to the extent to which we're just funding owner improvements that would happen anyway, because it's not as if we're funding the entire cost. So that ratepayer has to have the financial ability to pay for the irrigation, which could dwarf the cost of the actual, the plants and flowers. So have you guys had any thoughts about to what extent, these investments drive net new turf removal versus otherwise?
Yeah, that is a good question. Let me know if I'm responding to it. I think what you're talking about maybe is free riders, people who were already going to change their landscaping and now are going to take advantage of this program to help fund that, versus actually someone who was not considering a landscaping change but does consider it because this program is available.
Yep.
Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah, so there are some scholarly articles on that, and I would need to brush up on it. But my recollection is that that free riding does occur. There are people who are already going to be making landscaping changes because it makes financial sense for them, and this program doesn't change that decision, but they tap into it to reduce their cost. But unfortunately, off the top of my head, that's all I could say about it tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's really hard to know, but it's one of these things when you look at what is sort of a big increase on certain ratepayers, and then has no real ROI for us at our level, and then captures reimburses spending that might happen anyway. I wonder what sort of the total return of it would be for a program like this, which I'm all for trying stuff. I think this council has been good at that. So just probably limiting this to something that's pretty small scale to see what happens and see where turf's removed from there.
Jeremy?
First, to build on what Ryan said a bit, I mean, I do think that's a concern, but overall, I think it's an exciting thing to try, and a really good program that's seen really strong adoption all over the place, not just around here. Even if it influences a little bit of a change in behavior, right? So someone does a little bit more, or uses a certain kind of plant that's also fire-wise, perhaps. There's a lot of ways you can structure these to get public benefit out of it. I would focus on this chemical thing. I think, if that's one of those public benefit issues, and it'd be nice if we could think about building something in there. The state program you mentioned, I was going to ask you about, and since, we're not adopting any program at the moment, and that's supposed to come out by September, I think we need to see what that is to inform the final answer here, and, make ours complementary. That program doesn't have a ton of funding, but it's a good way for us to try something again. On the square footage and that chart, one thing I just want to remind everyone is those numbers were pretty bookended, right? Like that, the 5% was based on $5 a square foot and like $1 million of funding.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're talking about trying 100,000 or 200,000, and if we're talking about $2 or $3 a square foot instead of $5 a square foot, that shrinks really quickly. There's a lot of leverage there. So I'd encourage us to look at that. And then to Becca's point, couldn't agree more. I don't want to increase the top line of people who are already exhibiting the behavior we're trying to obtain, right? But complementary with our next iteration of these tiered structures and building it into that, I think we can still show significant reductions for our residential, or let's just say for our residents and businesses, and also have this available for folks who want to move down into that lower cost per unit that we're proposing. Let's put it that way. So I'm very supportive of it. The last question I had for you was around those vendors. And one thing I've seen be really effective with these types of programs other places is having a preferred vendors list where that price is set, or at least set to a range, which helps get people over that hump, right? And that they have a number they can call. It's easy. And that is a problem around here, right? Like if you call a landscaper, a lot of them will say, yeah, we'll be there in 2 years. So looking into that further and seeing how we could structure something potentially with a preferred vendors or approved vendors even, which makes it easier on us. Of course, I wouldn't want to take away the ability for a homeowner to do it themselves and still be eligible. So it can't be a requirement, but just a way to make this easier and doesn't take a lot of work on our end to enable that. If we can drill into it, please.
Yeah, and one thought on that is we're part of the Weber Basin Water Conservancy District, and they offer a lot of great classes down on their campus. Some of them are online about how to re-landscape, and local scape is their word for it. And so that's another tool I think we'd potentially leverage if we were to go down this path for people who wanted to do it themselves, but also are a little overwhelmed by the idea of trying to do it yourself.
Yeah, I agree. Everybody seems to be on the same page. On the free rider part, we are always going to have free riders on programs that are encouraging good behavior, but sometimes that can be a snowball effect where, your neighbor sees you doing something good and then you do something good, and hopefully we get enough of that. And the net positive is it's less water usage, and that's what we want. I really don't care why people are getting to less water usage. I just want them there. So I honestly don't care why. I just want them using less water. And then something that's come up over the last couple of years, and maybe Clint, you can refresh my memory. We've had this conversation a couple of times. I think Steve brought it up originally. This is a much larger conversation, but we live in a high desert and we're watering the roughs on our golf courses. And it seems to me that we could put our money where our mouth is and change the landscaping on our golf courses and on any of those surfaces that are not heavily used, are not necessary. We play golf in places that don't have rough. I don't think we should be watering our rough anymore on the golf course. So
I think they did cut back.
Yeah, I think we're cutting back. There's a lot of water conservation efforts going on throughout the city. I totally acknowledge that, but actually changing the landscaping to meet a similar kind of a standard, that's putting our money where our mouth is. It's a huge program, but it's a significant amount of water that we could save, and it's super visible. And then maybe there's some economies of scale, to Jeremy's point, where we have potentially some resources, whether it's the plants or the ground cover, even contractors that are lined up and have plenty of work to keep them going, and then they get referred out to residential uses and multifamily uses and stuff like that. This is going to be a long process. Hopefully it continues on for the next 10 years until our community looks a little bit different and uses a lot less water. But to me, the golf course is a starting point. And I can't remember exactly why that conversation kind of fell flat last time. I think we started conserving more water, but we didn't really talk about changing the landscaping out there.
Yeah, I don't think we ever concluded that conversation. So I think it's just a matter of playability on the golf course. So I think, the golf manager, Vaughn Robinson, would want to weigh in. I mean, I spend most of my time in the rough and off the rough, so it doesn't matter anyway for me. But he, people who know more about golf than me would want to weigh in on that. Like you, Max, I think you are a good golfer.
You can weigh in. A few years ago, the council was looking at revising the LMC in regards to gravel, and that was a big issue for then planning director Erickson. I don't think we made changes to the LMC, but it seems to me that whatever guidelines this program has, we need to have the two in sync. Do you remember?
I definitely remember the conversation about gravel. Unfortunately, I wouldn't want to speak to it. I do know that water conservation in the LMC is a conversation that's going on right now. I know a few months ago, staff went before the Planning Commission to discuss water conservation and goals there. But yeah.
I just think that needs to be looked at as part of whatever we're going to be doing to make sure that we've got the two in sync.
One thing I'd like to throw out too is, as we refine this and there's so many iterations and, like we're talking about just trying stuff, I'd love to push to have something in place at the latest, like next spring, where people can start doing this. And if that means that we don't necessarily get to all of those iterations by then, that maybe that's okay. We just start small and roll this out as we see and tweak it as we go. Make a continuous improvement instead of getting it, packaged right up front.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah,
The
and
sooner we get going, anything is better than nothing. So
Right,
let's start.
I think we all have heard these stories about the Great Salt Lake, and I think this community needs to do its part as well. We might not see it directly, but if we don't have the Great Salt Lake, we don't really have a town. So let's be pretty honest about that. And I would say, I think it was either in your staff report or something I read that the museum was doing, but there's over 1,000 plants that are native to Park City. And I think I really liked the idea of us maybe even thinking of helping people buy native plants or look into subsidizing those. We did that with trees. Perhaps we could do that with these plants. I really loved that picture. I'm in the process of doing this in my own yard right now. So I loved that picture with the rocks and then the native plant and how you can, take flat rocks and make it look just as pretty as grass. It's actually way better to me than grass, but I think that's another part we could look at. And so I'm get as aggressive as you want. That's where I am.
Okay, does that give you enough direction from council?
I think so. Just to repeat back, kind of what I'm hearing is it's okay if we start small. We can be incremental about this. I could run through my notes, but I think what I'm hearing is let's start small, but let's build on the lessons learned and see where we want to take this program.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Do you want to try to narrow in on an amount annually at least?
Yeah.
Start with 200 grand.
Okay. And then incentive wise, 50 cents a square foot, $1 a square foot.
I'd urge us to look towards the higher end because of how expensive it is to do things around here, but not go crazy. So if you say that's $1, $2, $3, I think we should look to you probably for what you'd recommend, but
okay.
Not.
In the Southern Nevada Water Authority one, they're pre-conversion, they have a lot of the, program conditions and pre-conversion eligibility. And would you be looking to kind of copy some of those things? I know they have some requirements as to what's there already.
Yeah.
And size of the area that I think their minimum size is 400 square feet.
I think, so we'll talk about that a little bit more. I think we would copy the general outline of that program, but, we're not, especially starting out, we're not looking to get too legalistic or regulatory about it. We want to see what makes sense rather than see what makes sense, even if that means making a few mistakes along the way, rather than preventing making any mistakes by making the application 10 pages long and eliminating a lot of people.
Okay.
Anything else? All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Oh, so we actually have a couple other questions for council, if that's all right. Looks like we got 5 minutes. So
We have 5 minutes. Let's talk fast.
I'll move quickly. Revenue options. At 200K, we're not talking about a large rate increase. We're talking about 1%. Is that something we can absorb in the existing and make changes later, or should we try and modify the rate proposal before council?
I guess that's a question for council. It depends on when we want to launch a program. I would assume we would want to come back with a more defined program. So
Mhm.
we might be in
Yes.
next spring, just, we're almost in August now. And so really, we'd be at the tail end of a fiscal year when we start this program. So, maybe even the first year we could limit it to 50 grand or 100 grand. And then July 1 forward, it'd be 200.
Yeah, but let's not wait till spring to have that conversation. Let's
Yeah.
go ahead and do it in the
Have it
dead of
ready in
winter.
March. Yeah.
And then they can line up their contractors and like work
Yeah.
should start in the spring. So we really want to get this done, you know,
When the snow flies.
yeah.
And then I think the other question was, funded across the board or focused more on, the top, or like, not raise rates just for this on the lowest 25th percentile of users or something like that. We can bring that back for further discussion.
Some
too.
recommendations.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Perfect. And then the last one was just program permanence. So people like Southern Nevada Water Authority are actually requiring applicants to enact an easement on their property, a deed restriction, so that turf doesn't reappear. That's great. It creates permanence. It also creates a pretty large barrier to entry and administrative hurdle. Staff would recommend that we don't do that at this point, but council could choose to add that as a requirement in the future. But turn that over to you guys if you feel differently about that.
I'd say no. I mean, I think it's just another barrier to getting people to do it. And honestly, the risk and cost of someone going through all this effort and then, 5 years later saying, oh, forget it, I'm going to put in a whole lawn. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think we're solving a problem we don't quite have.
I think he's saying that like if you sold the house to someone
Right,
and they
yeah.
come in, and so maybe Ryan would know better, but I think it might be something that we would want the Board of Realtors to be a part of and be a partner and say, when you're selling a home that has this, please let the people, understand there's a reason for it. So maybe it's more of a partnership versus a mandatory agreement there.
I think.
You want to comment on that, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, we don't. But sorry, go ahead, Max. Oh no, I was gonna say I don't think we see enough people adding lawns, because this is also now retrofitting the sprinkler system back to spray. I don't think that's a big enough concern to justify the administrative hurdle of easements. I think that gets complicated and scary potentially for some owners we want to apply.
Sure.
But maybe we do like a review after 4 years and see,
How
or
many?
4 or 5 years and see consistency and see how it works. But I think, not do it right away, but do a review.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Good job. Right on time. Okay, let's now move into conservation water rate discussion. Who?
So did you just join
Scramble, not left off.
We're ready when you are.
Excellent. I'm just finishing pulling up the slides.
Okay.
It's always harder to do things when people are watching.
Ryan's not watching.
All right, we're here. Thank you for your patience. So staff is returning to council for a second follow-up discussion on the conservation rate proposal we presented in April. I think at a high level, the goal of the rate proposal, like we briefly mentioned, is not to generate additional revenue, but it is to further incentivize conservation primarily for multifamily, commercial, and irrigation accounts. We had a good conversation about that in April, and council had a few questions that we're returning with answers on related to that. The first question was understanding how irrigation accounts are connected to either multifamily or commercial accounts, because that is the pattern that we see. Irrigation accounts are always associated with another use, and then discuss additional implementation options. Oh yeah, and Eric has joined on Zoom as well. So he's available for any questions that may come up. So going back to irrigation accounts, here's our table of how water accounts are broken down in the city, both total number of accounts and percentage. So we have 179 irrigation accounts. About 3/4 of those accounts are associated with multifamily and 1/4 associated with commercial. So in a real sense, irrigation accounts are often an extension of a multifamily user in town, although not always. And that was something I don't think staff had fully thought through in our first proposal. And so thank you, council, for highlighting that. And we've made some changes, some recommended changes to the rate structure to address that impact that irrigation accounts would have on multifamily accounts in town. So high level, big summary of the changes that we've made. We made a slight reduction in single family residential rates. We rebalanced multifamily and irrigation accounts based on that conversation that I just outlined. And then we went through and created a little more consistency in our pricing philosophy. So you'll see more, I guess, symmetry in the proposal, for lack of a better word, where we tried to tag indoor usage starting at around $5 per gallon, and then outdoor and commercial usage starting at $7.50 per unit of water. So jumping in, stepping towards the actual grid, which I appreciate is a lot of information. The next 2 slides will just provide a little more context.
Jason, can I just interrupt you? On that
Sure.
previous slide, that's per 1,000 gallons?
Yes.
Okay, just want to clarify. Thanks.
So this first bar chart shows a couple of things. One of the industry standards that we try and apply is that an account class usage should be roughly equivalent to the amount of money it puts in to fund the water department. And that creates, the argument is that creates some fairness in the rate structure. If you're using 40% of the water, your rate class can contribute 40% of the revenue needed to operate that system. Within that rate class, you can then divide people up into people who are using water more efficiently or using less water and see a reduction in their cost, to people who are using above average amounts of water who would see an increase in the cost of water. So this bar chart, the blue bar is the historic share of revenue. So under our current rate proposal, the orange bar is revision 1, the change that occurred there. The kind of orange bar is the current proposal. And then the gray bar is the percentage of consumption. And so you can see there's some good parity across that connection between the percentage of water a group is using and the revenue that the city is seeing from that group. You'll see, highlighting the changes that have occurred, our first proposal, irrigation basically doubled from 9% of the revenue to 18%. We've backed that off to 11, let's call it 12% of the revenue. So on the whole, the irrigation class is still seeing an increase, but they're seeing less of an increase than in our first proposal. Multifamily is seeing a slight decrease, and commercial users are seeing a slight increase to help us offset that reduction in the commercial rate class.
Interrupt you.
Yeah.
Hey, we forgot to introduce Brenda Wild. She's behind us. I tried to drag her up here. Maybe y'all can help me, but but Brenda is the one that implements this program and interfaces with customers. So she is the front of the house in terms of water billing and our customer service program.
And then the next kind of introductory into the structure is just a table where we took a low user, the highest user, and then someone about in the middle, and highlighted what they would experience under this rate proposal. So as Becca and I discussed, residential rate class has seen a reduction overall. Even the high user is a little bit smaller. Irrigation users, those users who are using more water are going to see an increase. Commercial high users are going to see a substantial increase at about a 32% increase in their water bill. Multifamily are going to see escalating decrease in their bill.
Let's get a question on this one. So when we look at multifamily and that top user, that's negative, what, 11,000?
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk a little bit about, even if we assumed that was also an irrigation user, that's positive 5,000 for the top user, which guessing it might not be at 4.5 million gallons. It's a heck of a lot of water. What's the strategy to where that is what we're trying to achieve? Does that make sense? Is this around water conservation? Is this around lowering the rates because we're worried about the multifamily class and hitting income levels? What exactly is the driver there?
Yeah, it's definitely nuanced. I mean, we've heard from, I believe we've heard from council a desire to ensure multifamily accounts are not paying more than their share of consumption. And so I'd say it's kind of all of the above. There is some conservation input that went into that decision, and then there's also the feedback, our interpretation of the feedback from council about where they'd like to see the rates go.
So we had
Irrigation add-on.
And the impact, like you were highlighting in your example, the fact that a multifamily account also has an irrigation account. And so that 17% reduction isn't likely to be fully realized because there's likely an irrigation increase that they may be feeling as well.
So the four of us have spent a lot of time in the room talking about these rates over the last couple months since April, quite frankly. And I think Jeremy's question comes in. I think we kind of touched on it in our last meeting, which is the thing that we're not really clear on. And I think that the council made sort of a generalization about in April was that this multifamily class was going to be made up of, our most economically challenged group of people, which some of that class is in that realm, but also a huge portion of this group is going to be a high nightly rental group in a luxury multifamily unit complex. And I'm thinking that it makes some sense to try and tease out what this class looks like, because I think we're making too many assumptions. And I share Jeremy's concern that we are giving a discount to the entire class when a big portion of that class could actually be a big part of the problem that we're trying to solve. And we want to incentivize that water conservation, especially at that higher income level. And I just think we're making assumptions here. And I don't know that we have fully teased this out. But without putting speed bumps in the way of implementing these rates, I think that hopefully this can be somewhat of a living piece before we implement it to tease out this particular rate class a little better, like you did with the irrigation rate class since our last conversation. Really, we kind of figured out we answered some questions that we had, and we realized, to your point here, that 75% of them are associated with multifamily. So I don't know. I mean, that's not clear direction other than I'd like to tease out this particular class a little bit, because this is a little bit counterproductive to give this big of a discount, even though it is the direction we gave you. I want to make sure that we're clear there. We gave you this direction. You did exactly what we asked, but we were operating on assumptions that maybe were inaccurate. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
May I ask a question? And completely pardon my being naive to this, but is there at all a possibility that with what Max is saying, we could discount someone's bill based on primary or secondary residency, if that was a way to go with the multifamily only, so that you could say, okay, well, 70% of these people in multifamily it's a second home, but that's how the tax record is. So we will not be discounting that. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm just trying to throw something out there,
So-
maybe how we look at it through a tax bill.
I think we would need to circle with the legal team there and understand the limits of our ability to make a policy recommendation like that. Our goal is that water service generally reflects the cost of providing service. And so there's a tight connection to be made for the argument that people who use more water are driving more expenses for the utility. And so we should apply policy there. I'm not sure to what extent water rates can be used to support affordability goals. So I guess my answer is we're happy to look into that, but we would need to circle as a team.
Or perhaps we go opposite and are able to maybe provide some sort of a subsidy to those people who were in more of the primary category or something like that. I mean, just thinking of it so that it's legal, but we are helping those who are not hurting the others.
Yeah, it's relatively common, right, for utilities to have low income programs. And maybe we're at a point where, another growing pain, we should look at that. I don't think it's something that should hold up implementation of what we're talking about now with the incentive program and the additional tiering. I'd say that's because it is talk about nuanced, right? I mean, that gets really messy. But there are strong models on how to do it and do it well that have worked.
Don't we have a program for low income?
So we do have a low income program for people. It's basically a hardship program. So if someone
Right.
comes to the city in a hardship situation, we can make a recommendation that they go onto a hardship rate for a period of time.
So this is kind of a next step. Like it's in between a true hardship program and regular rates, right? It's intermediary and it's essentially permanent. But using that, we could design a model that targets what we're trying to target from the policy perspective without missing the opportunity to apply the same policy to multifamily that we're applying to the other rate classes. Right? I have such a hard time with that negative 11,000. Like when I saw it, I'm like, well, there's 11,000 towards our incentive program, make that zero. And because we're talking about compared to previous implementing and multifamily hasn't been tiered, right? Well, I guess there are like 2 or 3 tiers.
There are tiers. Some of the tiers were set so high that customers might not experience them.
Right. So, it's really what's the problem we're trying to solve, and then what's the way we should target that problem. And I think if we keep this conversation to, this is honestly the stick for water conservation. We've applied it to residential. We've seen some success. So we're rolling it out to the other rate classes. We don't want to negatively impact anyone. We don't want to harm them, right? Where they can't afford their utility bills. And then a separate lane is we want to make sure that going forward, that stays separate, right? That we're not impacting our low income needs with aggressive tiering. But personally, if that was something that came out like for next cycle, like FY24, I think that would be fine. I mean, it's an evolution.
Even in that, the top tier multifamily housing, they're in that top tier because of how much water use they're using. So if they take advantage of opportunities to reduce their usage, they could come down. I mean, I guess it's a big drop from 4.5 to 85, from 4.5 million gallons to 85,000. But yeah, maybe to add some tiers in there so that they don't have to drop that much to start to see some benefits. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, to some degree. I mean,
that's a really big drop.
You're on the right track there, though, right? I mean, if the program's designed with that stick in mind of we're going to basically charge the higher water users more, right? More stress on the infrastructure. There's good reason for it. Then let's do that, right? Like, let's not give them a discount.
So part of the problem here, though, I don't disagree, but part of what these guys were trying to accomplish was sort of a net neutral impact. And we're talking about one rate class, and we're saying maybe we take that to zero. Now we have a net positive financial impact to the city. And so who's going to get, so then it funds the next program, the program we previously spoke to that we aren't sure is going to work yet. Now we have some data to say so, but so if I hear you correctly, it's as is fine, but next year, let's come back with figuring out how, because that incentive program might get kicked into place. Let's figure out how to whittle this down to a zero number so we can fund that program going forward. Or are you saying, put this in a savings account and use it to fund that program out of the gate?
I'd say take one swing at it. And when because I mean, we're gonna get to it, but you're talking about implementing these January 1st as an option?
Yes.
That's the soonest, right?
I mean, council could go sooner, but our recommendation is January
Because
1st.
the high usage is going to be in the summer. So really, practically, we're not going to see anything except that reduction early, and it would be minimal because we don't have irrigation that would be happening and all that. So I would say, depending on the answer to that question of when we want to implement these rates, if it is going to be a few months off into the future, then take that one swing at it, build the fund for whatever amount shakes out. I think we said 200, right? For the incentive program. And then, try it, see how it goes, and follow the continuous improvement lane.
We definitely could modify the rate structure to, maybe bring in some of the higher blocks on multifamily and take another level of analysis on that group. So I think with the time we have, we could certainly rerun the model, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I honestly, I think that there's been a ton of good work done here. I think it does make sense to let's rerun it, because I think you did exactly what we asked for, but we're continuing to learn. And when we see this result, we go, oh man, what did we miss in our recommendation? And I think that's coming to light here. But in terms of incentivizing less water use, it's hard to justify and saying we're incentivizing less water use while we give, a 4.5 million gallon per user or user a discount. So it's let's figure out how to. I think that goal, and I think you guys gave that direction. You did exactly what we asked for, and we're asking for something a little bit.
That's perfect.
Tweak it.
Part of the iterative process, and I think we'd be happy to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just echo that. I mean, this is a program that touches every single, resident or business in town. So we're happy to come back as many times as we need to adjust. And we're also looking at, this year's consumption patterns, which are lower. And so there's likely going to have to be some calibration. Even if you said no changes, we would probably still come back with some changes based on demand patterns this year. So we're happy to keep doing it.
Anything else? No? Okay.
Cool. So I'll run through these next slides quickly because it sounds like we're going to iterate again, but just the high level overview. This is the former proposal. You'll see irrigation didn't experience any discount at all. The new water rate proposal, where as a class, irrigation is still paying more money, but we're not hitting them on the head as hard as we were in that first proposal. To highlight where those changes have occurred in the rate structure, this is a comparison of the percentage difference between our former proposal and our current proposal. You can highlight those discounts again and where there were increases that did occur in commercial and multifamily. Differences in dollar amounts, just another way to look at that same data. Theoretical year-over-year change in the max bill. So again, we hope the pattern that you're seeing is low users are going to pay less and high users are going to pay more.
So Jason, just to highlight, because I agree this is great work. The net effect here is most of our water users are going to see a net reduction in their water bills.
Correct, especially
that's like great news for the community, right?
Yeah, because most of our users are single family residential, 80%. Most of our users are going to see a decrease in their water bill.
But even the other rate classes, if they're conserving, their bill drops.
Yeah, they have more control over their bill than they've had in the past. Their decisions are rewarded or incentivized more, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could you maybe, if you do bring back another iteration of this, could you give it, could you show us how it would apply to something like one of our affordable housing projects that we're working on that's going to be multifamily, like Homestake, that would be 126 units, and how it could potentially affect water rates on something? I'm not sure if that would be a fall into that 4.5 galleon or where that would fall in, but it would be interesting to know how us adjusting them. I think we just kind of need like a true to life example of something. And I think an affordable housing project that we're working on might help us see if it's like really helping people who are in need or if it's going in the other direction. So I think it would just be helpful to have an example like that.
Yeah, I'll talk with Jason Glidden and see what we can pull together on that.
Yeah, if it's not too much work too.
Yeah, we'll take a look.
Thank you.
Hey, can I ask just real quick on that? Just back to the sort of good news story. Most users, the rate goes down. I do, as a caveat to that, though, I still do have the concern that up here on the top, over to the right in the chart, we're hitting where we might be hitting where a lot of our primary residents are, simply because they're here all year using water. And so is there any way to tease out kind of where our locals are in the chart versus where our second homeowners are in the chart, especially on, so I guess on multifamily is where it really matters. Does that make sense? Is there any way to show us where our locals are in this chart?
Your question makes sense. I'm struggling with whether we have a tool to help highlight that. I will say, in general, the discretionary water use and the large volumes of water use occurs outdoors, and that happens whether there's someone staying in that unit or not. The showers and the cooking and the restroom use aren't moving people very, very far in these tables. It's the every other night outdoor irrigation that really is where you start to move up these tiers. And that occurs whether there's an occupant in the unit or not.
Was that on multifamily though? Is that because they're using, what meter are they using to irrigate in multifamily that would cause that to be the case? They're not using irrigation meters?
So there's no standard there. So some complexes use their multifamily meter to irrigate. Some complexes, as we've talked about, have a secondary irrigation meter that they use. Even those complexes with that second meter may have a system that pulls some water out of their multifamily meter and then irrigates the rest with that irrigation meter. Unfortunately, from a data perspective, there's not a requirement for a multifamily house to have an irrigation meter and solely use that meter for outdoor irrigation.
I think by the numbers you showed here, it's less than half of multifamily have irrigation meters, right? So it's a pretty,
That's right.
There's not a tight correlation, but it would be, I agree with Ryan, that'd be interesting to see if we can tease it out a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, I'll get together with the team and see if we can think of a way to do that.
Once again, Eric gets to geek out on a rate class and figure out who's doing what.
As long as we just can continue to make adjustments, I'll be happy with my Excel sheet.
Cool. I think we are likely through the presentation then. It sounds like council would like an additional iteration, and staff is happy to provide that. And we will get that on the calendar.
Thank you so much. This was awesome work. I mean, the level of detail here is just tremendous. So thanks to all of you.
Yeah, thank you.
Great.
Thanks, guys.
We are ahead of schedule, and there may be people that want to discuss. So this was noticed for 4 o'clock. The snow script. Yeah. Okay, let's take a stretch break and come back just a little before 4.
$1 million.
Okay. Let's go ahead and resume and discuss a potential petition to annex one or more properties accessed from Snows Lane into the Park City Water Service District. Hello, Clint. Welcome
Hello.
back.
Let's see. All right, thank you very much. Clint McAfee, Public Utilities Director. So I'm here today to talk about a potential petition to annex that could come from a property owner to annex their property and possibly others into the Park City Water Service District. The gentleman's name is Kirk Johnson, and he's trying to join. So he's going to join us. He's had to travel to Washington, D.C. for personal reasons, but he's going to jump on as soon as he can. But I'll just jump right into it in the meantime. So just to kind of tee it up right out of the gate. So we're not asking council to take action on anything. We're purely looking for kind of feedback on this potential to see if there are any red flags. It's kind of a courtesy conversation with the property owner so they can decide whether or not they want to pursue a petition to annex into the district. So before I jump into this, I guess just a little bit why we're talking to this individual. So Kirk Johnson is recently bought the property, and I guess I'll just jump to the map here. Number 3 is his property. And as far as I know, that property gets their water from just surface water runoff. It's just a spring that they get all their water from. So he bought the property and he's trying to move. They have a water rights, about 6 acre feet, I think. And they're trying to file a change application to move that water into groundwater so they can drill a well and have a more reliable source of water. Park City is protesting that change application on the basis that it could potentially contaminate our aquifers and potentially deplete the amount of water that we have access to. It's kind of a general approach to all change applications like this that are located within our drinking water source protection zone. We just want to take a very cautious approach to anybody drilling holes through the protective layer that lies over our water supply.
Clint, is the house that we see at the end of the cul-de-sac, is that part of 3?
Sorry, could you ask that again?
Yeah, if you look at the very base of the cul-de-sac, there's a house. Is that part of number 3, parcel 3, lot 3? Is there?
Oh, right here.
Yeah.
That's actually an individual property. So that's number 4. This square here, is that what you're asking about?
If you come all the way down to where it makes a circle, right above the number 3, and looks like there's a house there.
There's a house here.
Right. Is that part of number 3?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so when we met with Kirk to discuss, why we're protesting this change application, try to reach a compromise, I suggested that they consider annexing into the Park City Water Service District. Currently, that area is not supplied by the municipal water system. And, one of the biggest risks I see with that is lack of fire protection. So as far as I know, there's no fire hydrants that are connected to anything meaningful up there. And so should there be a structure fire, it could easily spread to neighboring properties or the hillside. And then just the general reliance on, a single source is less desirable than, what we serve our community with 8 sources and, a lot of sophisticated infrastructure. So the Park City Water Service District is a separate entity than the city. And the reason it exists, my understanding, it was created initially so we could serve outside of the municipal boundaries. And I think at that time we were serving west up into the ski resorts. We were taken over some of their water systems. And so we created the district and expanded that boundary before the municipal boundary expanded up there. So the city council acts as the board of the district and city council. Let's see. So yeah, the city can provide municipal water service within the district, so we can expand outside of the city's boundary and have customers. One example of that is Mountaintop, just on the very top of the ridge above Park Meadows on the northern side of Park Meadows. I think it was in 2018, they petitioned the city to annex into the district and the city actually, and they later withdrew the petition to annex into the municipality. But they successfully did petition to annex into the district. And that was executed and done, and they're now Park City Water customers. So I guess in a nutshell, council could do the same thing with these properties. And again, this is the area. So the red line is this current city and municipal boundaries. Has Kirk joined us yet?
No, no.
Sorry about that. Just some technical issues there. So the red boundary is currently the municipal boundary and the water service district boundary. The only place the water service district boundary is different is where it goes out into the north into the Mountaintop to serve Mountaintop. The kind of the shaded boundary or shaded property is Park City owned property. So that's owned by the municipality. And so there you can see that there are 4 properties outside of both boundaries and 1 inside the boundary, but not served by the city's water system. So it's a little bit of a complicated area, but there are 5 total properties not served by the city, and 4 of those are outside of the boundaries.
What would happen to their water rates that they currently have? Would we absorb those if they joined our water? Would their 6 acre feet, whatever, just be kind of absorbed into the cities?
So nothing would happen automatically like that. The city council could always condition the annexation on, something happening with those rights. We would just have to look at it at that time when they actually petition the city. So just, I did a quick check and just had our engineer run a quick model as a very short study just to see, from a fatal flaw standpoint, could we even get them water pressure? And based on the model, we're looking at 56 PSI at the highest property. So it's not super high pressure, but it's acceptable. But a further engineering study would have to be conducted to analyze these factors to make sure, we had the adequate storage and source. And, I honestly don't see any issues. But we definitely want to verify that, so we comply with all Division of Drinking Water regulations. They all specify minimum sizing requirements on these factors. And then,
could I ask you a question? Yeah. So if you zoom into the map, they have, it looks like the boundary line crosses some ponds. Are those their ponds?
Right here?
Like if you go further to the left, like right in, like I zoomed in on Google Earth, you can see too, but you can zoom in on this picture too. And so I just wondered, like, does anything come from those ponds at all, or?
There is water running out of this area. There's ponds on their properties, and they all water rights of varying degree, and there's a lot of water sources that originate and flow through their properties.
Okay.
And so there's this pond right here outside of the district. We have a golf course pond over here, and on the city property, there's golf ponds all over the golf course. But
yeah, I think it just looks like if you zoom all the way in, there's 3 or 4 ponds right that looks like their boundary line crosses right into.
You're talking this property here. I don't know if you can see my cursor. Yeah. Between 3 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those are ponds.
They just share those, that the boundary line just.
You know, I don't know
their
the
pond?
detail there on, yeah. So they would also have to look at the infrastructure required and the cost estimate and a cost estimate. So this would cost money to do this engineering study. And he's in. Okay. Is Kirk with us in Zoom land? Okay. And he got a quote from engineering. It was like $5,000 or something. So and he's willing to pay that, but you know, he liked the idea of having this meeting before he made that expenditure, just to make sure council didn't have any red flags. So if a petition was filed, we would recommend entering into an annexation agreement that outline the terms of, and maybe we'll just take a pause here.
Hello.
Hey, Kirk.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, Kirk, I'm kind of halfway through the presentation, but we'll take a pause and maybe you could just introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Kirk Johnson. I own 320 Snows Lane.
Welcome.
Great.
It's in Summit County, but this is we're talking about city. So, you know, I'm confused. I'm confused as a property owner, but I'm happy to participate and be a part. And, you know, I want to do whatever we can do to make it right. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Kirk. So I was just explaining to council that this is a kind of a courtesy meeting to see if there's any information that will influence whether or not you want to file a petition to annex into the district. So here's an example annexation agreement. This is kind of copied and pasted from the Mountaintop agreement. And in a nutshell, you know, they have to install a water system that is to Park City standards, dedicate that to Park City, give us legal access to operate and maintain, become Park City customers and pay the applicable water rates and pay for everything. So there's no cost burden at all on existing customers. That's kind of the foundational element of this agreement, that, you know, the entities and the properties being annexed in would bear the burden of that cost. And included that would be water impact fees. You know, it's as if it was a vacant lot and a house is built. It's kind of the same thing. All of a sudden a new house is being served. And again, I'm not going to go through this, but I think the annexation process looks very similar to the municipal annexation process. You know, it's pretty involved. But again, we executed it with Mountaintop. It took 18 months or something to, you know, from start to finish, because they had a substantial infrastructure to put in. So I would support, you know, from a water perspective, a water provider perspective, I would support an annexation for these properties for these reasons that they're outlined in the staff report. And again, I think the biggest benefit is the fire protection and just the reliability and quality of service to those properties. You know, I think their sources are probably fine, but they're susceptible to interruption. You know, sole source of water supply. There's a lot of things that could interrupt that or cause an upset. And then also for the reasons that we're protesting, you know, try to minimize the amount of water drawn from the aquifers that we're also trying to draw from. And then the cons, I think, are it's expensive for the property owners and time consuming for staff. But it's, you know, those are the cons. So that's all I have for a presentation.
Just so I'm clear, one of those parcels can petition to annex, or do they all have to get together and do that?
I think just one can petition.
Well, can I interrupt here for a moment?
Sure.
So I'm currently in application for a well permit. And I don't want any of this to inhibit my application for a well permit.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we would, we'll continue to protest your change application just as we are, you know, regardless.
But we have evidence that says the well permit is perfectly fine.
Yeah. So I don't think this.
So I mean, are you telling me I can't have a well?
So you're trying to, you filed a change application to move water rights into an underground well, and we're protesting that. And in the last meeting, we suggested you consider annexing into the district. And so that's what's brought us here today.
Well, but listen, I mean, let's be clear. The people have to pay their pro rata share. And we've talked about this, that they're likely not going to fund it. We're in the county, we're not in the city. So in the meantime, I want to drill a well and for my house. And I'm supporting, believe me, I'm supporting what you're suggesting, okay? But that shouldn't stop me from wanting to drill a well. Okay, so which one is it? Are you fighting me, or are we together on the same team?
So this meeting and this discussion in no way impacts your change application. So that will continue on its own independent path, whether or not this is more of a, presenting an alternative, but it wouldn't influence your ability to drill your well or our ability to protest your change application.
Okay. So let me ask very specifically. We're trying to support putting in, city water to county land. Okay. I'm trying to support that. However, I also need to have a well. So why are you protesting? Are you protesting my well? Why?
Mm-hmm.
When we're trying to be, I'm trying to be, how do I say it? Cooperative and supporting your intent.
Sure. So whether you petition to annex into the district is your decision or not. And as I mentioned, whether you do or not does not influence whether or not the outcome of your attempt to drill a well, if that makes sense. So this meeting isn't, trying to sabotage your ability to drill a well. It's intended to provide an alternative to that other properties surrounding the city have had. So I'll just say it again, your change application is not influenced by this discussion or whether or not you would petition the city for annexation.
Okay, well, that's fair. Just know that I agree that having city water would be a better alternative, but because I'm building a house and it can't be done before the house is built, right? I'm looking for I need an interim solution, which is the well. But however, I would love it if we could do the water as we've all talked about here.
Yeah, and
that's our preference.
Yep, understood. And again, I'll just state again that your well and your change application are proceeding on an independent path, and that the outcome will be determined independent of this. So I think
but just to be clear, you guys never fought. You never. The city of Park City did not protest other wells that have been installed on neighboring properties.
I'm kind of thinking we're straying a bit from the conversation here, and perhaps you need to have some more time with the applicant or with Kirk, but he's not even an applicant yet.
Yeah.
To clarify options.
Agreed. And I think today's discussion, I think is still valuable just to see if council, if Kirk decides to file a petition, is there any red flags is basically the question here.
Okay.
And so Kirk can use that information to decide whether or not to file a petition.
Okay. So let's focus on that. Council, do you see any red flags were he to petition?
Just real quick, you mentioned kind of briefly other properties around the community have annexed in to the water district, but not into the city. And the reason for that is many of those properties would be considered a non-conforming use in the city boundaries, but it makes sense for them to be on city water. Is that correct?
That was my recollection, that
Okay.
they withdrew their application because of the burden of conforming to, our codes and standards.
So this isn't a one-off. This has happened before. We're not breaking any mold here by any stretch.
No.
Correct.
If we were to, okay, cool.
Correct.
Just want to make sure.
Jeremy?
I think it's an interesting policy discussion. I mean, expanding our water service outside of municipal boundaries, right? And I know we've done it for one area of it's what, 5 houses, 6 houses?
12
12,
on Mountaintop.
but they're all right there clustered.
Yes. It was a subdivision, 12 lot
Yeah.
subdivision.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying, I don't know. I'd have to probably learn more. I think it would be interesting to talk about, would it be a request to annex just into the water district, or would it make sense to talk about possibly annexing into the city? See where it goes.
Becca?
Yeah, I have no concerns. We have all kinds of one-offs around town. We have parts of our Park City, Summit County, and parts of Park City. They're in Wasatch County. We have weird water agreements and all kinds of things kind of across. And so I think the goal is to make sure that we are providing people that would be serviced by our fire department and our police department and our community services with good, safe drinking water, and also fire suppression, I think, is really important as we have our fire conversation. So I think it makes a lot of sense.
I guess that's one of the things maybe we talk
Uh-huh.
about when it comes back, but would it be serviced by our municipal services if it's not in our municipal boundary?
Yeah, because if they had an issue, our responders would still be the first responders.
Through the interlocal?
Yeah.
So we'd have to, I guess we'd have to get into those details.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Tana?
Yeah, my only thought there was, so we would be putting like a fire hydrant or fire suppression system in if they were annexed into that area, correct? That's what
Yeah,
that is,
just
okay.
like a normal, fire hydrant, not anything in their building or anything. It's just
It's just a fire hydrant goes
along
in,
the side of the
they have
road
somewhere
and-
to-
correct.
That was my only question on that.
Yes.
Ryan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think just related to the first question Becca asked, that was mine, and I would expect that it would include a transfer of their water rights to the water system. But beyond that, there seems to be a good cause to do it for fire safety. So, and among the other reasons in the staff report, so no big objection.
Okay, thank you. Does that give you what you need?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we wanted to hear, just to net. So I think Kirk is informed now, and he can make a decision whether or not he wants to petition, either solely or along with some neighbors.
Okay,
So
thank you. Kirk, thank you for joining us tonight.
anything else from you, Kirk?
No, just the house is under construction, and we're going to pursue the well, and then we'll if our neighbors can join in to share the cost, that's great, but I really don't think they will.
Great. Thanks for your time, Council and Mayor.
Just out of curiosity, who grants the well permit?
The Division of Water Rights.
Thanks.
So there's the change application that's happening first. They're trying to move their water rights, and then a well permit would happen later after they had the water rights moved into a well.
Okay.
So
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
great. Thanks.
Well, let's move along then and bring up the transportation team to discuss the winter 2022 to 23 transportation operations. It's a big group. I think I'm fine. Yeah, I'm good. I need to just swap all of these out for that kind of. Oh, never mind. Using too much. I'm good. Thank you, though.
I'm sure we got enough. Are you sure you don't need more?
I don't need.
Greetings. It's good to be with you this evening. I am Matt Neely, and I'm the Transportation Director. Before we get started, I just wanted to share, for the sake of time, we will come back on September 1st for the parking section of the presentation.
A part two session? Did you say part two?
Part two, well,
Parking, okay.
parking.
Okay.
Parking piece.
Thank you.
And so it's good to be with the council and Mayor Nan Worrell. And we appreciate the opportunity to come and share the winter transportation plan for the 2022-23 winter season. Our team has put a lot of effort into this plan, and you will hear from a few of them today. This is a comprehensive and collaborative plan that includes transit, parking, planning, communications, special events, and police. Also want to include the ongoing coordination and collaboration with Deer Valley and the Park City Mountain Resort. This plan is focused on accomplishing the following goals, as we have heard from the council on March 31st. Protect residential areas, transit priority, traffic management flow. Recognizing this is a work in progress for what we're sharing this evening. And this is a work session to share with you where we are today. There's still a lot of work in front of us that still needs to go. And just wanted to highlight that we've got Scott Burnham and also Kim. Her name just blanked on me. Sorry about that. And they're with our transit piece. And then we've got John Weinenhammer with us.
Okay. Before you get too much further, I encourage you to introduce yourself.
Oh, I just figured y'all knew me. So I am Matt Neely, and I'm, as I said before, the Transportation Director. I came to Park City in May, and I came from Washington State DOT, where I worked as a traffic engineer for 22 years. And so there I was involved in traffic operations, which includes signal design, intelligent transportation systems, as they call it, which you're probably familiar with when you see VMS signs and the cameras on the roadways, and data stations as you drive past that collects vehicle information, tells us how many cars are on the road, how fast you're going, how big the car is. All that information is used for planning purposes. It's kind of the thing that just really motivates me, kind of gets me excited to understand how things are moving on a highway or roadway. And it just allows us to better manage the system and to be able to maximize capacity as we think about it. And the goal in my career has always been focused on trying to do as much as we can with what we have before we have to build more. And so just trying to maximize what's here in the city is kind of what I've focused on from the time I came here. And Park City is a great place. It's a place I came on my first date as a 16-year-old kid driving in from the valley. But it's a fun place to come and visit with my own family now. And to try to maintain that is what I've been trying to focus on. And so I'm excited to share with you what the team's been working on today. I think there's a lot of great things that's here. And I think there's more to come. And we're looking to just get more from you tonight so that we can keep moving forward. And we'll highlight what some of those decisions are and look forward to hearing your comments. So winter transit, Kim?
Next slide. Yes, so just a quick walkthrough of our decision timeline. We first came and talked about a microtransit pilot concept in the council retreat back in February. And then in March, we had a council work session about transportation. In May, we put in our budget request based on what we believed the winter plan may look like at that time. And then in July, we had a meeting with our transportation liaisons and discussed kind of what we were looking at. And here we are. We're going to be doing a work session today, quick one, sounds like, to kind of get an idea if we're on the right track. In August, September, we want to take what comes from here today and make sure we're getting public feedback. We've definitely heard in the past we need to do better on that. And I think we've got a pretty solid plan that we'll go over here briefly in a minute. And then in September, we're hoping to come back, make sure, okay, is this the plan? Everybody good with it? If there's any tweaks, we have time to go back in and do that for the October council meeting. And then hopefully we leave there with a final plan so that we can go about executing it. And that would be the beginning of winter service after that, November 13th. It is really just around the corner. Right. So the engagement opportunities, you know, like I said, we did meet with our transportation liaisons as a starting point. We've gotten council input. Public feedback is yet to come. We plan on going door to door, talking about the winter transportation plan and seeing what the public has to say about it. Open houses. Postcards will be mailed out to everyone in the Park City zip code to get their feedback, and that will all be solicited online so that we can track and sort that feedback. We're going to, you know, push it on social media posts as well, make sure it gets out through KPCW, Park Record, Park City TV. Go out to social organizations. It's just a sample of some: Park City Community Foundation, the Senior Center, NAC. And then, of course, talk to our major stakeholders who we already have begun talking to, as Matt said, like resorts, business stakeholders, and our jurisdictional partners, High Valley Transit.
So I'm Scott Birmingham, I'm Transit Service Planner. So this slide here, it shows the initial proposed transit service for this next winter. It's based off of last winter's service. So you can see that, you know, frequencies, the routes are all pretty much the same as last winter, as well as the schedule hours. So a lot of those schedule hours, you know, for the longer durations, those are basically 6, 7 a.m. to like 11 p.m. Some of the others are more of a peak service where it's more of a 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. spread. So that's what the schedule hours are. And then, so that's what we use to base, you know, kind of what our proposed budget would be for the next winter. And so those numbers are actually for this next winter. So those are current budget numbers for this next winter. And those are fully loaded costs. Now, those other numbers in there are they're data that we've gathered to kind of show how did it go on last winter as far as the service went. So we do have like percentage of the trips overseed capacity for last winter. And we talk about a trip, that's basically like, say you're in Prospector Square and you're catching a one red. An inbound trip would be from Prospector Square all the way to Deer Valley. And then an outbound trip would be from Deer Valley back to Prospector Square. And so there's about, on those longer routes, longer scheduled hours, there's about 70 trips in a day. Inbound, outbound. And so you can see on, you know, certain routes, you know, I think everybody can understand that some of those routes were very, very full a lot of the time because these numbers represent the whole day, an average for the whole winter for the whole day. And we know that during the peak times, these were probably even higher. I also want to mention that these are based off of most of our buses have a seat capacity of about 30. So this would be one that's over 30 passengers on the bus on that trip at any one time. On the 10 white, it's a little more. It's more like 38 seated capacity on that. And then the average boards per service hour. Also, you can see certain routes are much higher than others. And so this data is kind of what we use to look ahead to see what are some of the needs that we have. And that's kind of where we go on to the next slide. I don't know if anybody had any questions about it.
Before you do that, I think Tana has a
Yeah,
question.
I just had two quick questions. The first one, what is the latest our buses run? Is it midnight or the last one is 11:10?
So we do have a citywide bus that runs until the last bus from the transit center is at 1:40 a.m. But most of the regular service would end by midnight.
And then the other question is, so you said 30 is the capacity seated. Do we have a capacity of standing?
Yeah, so our seated capacity, or not, our total capacity that we have is about 56, I believe. I'd have to have Franklin tell me for sure. I can't remember, but I think it's 56 is the total capacity, right? Yeah.
That probably without skis on.
Yeah.
Without your skis. Okay, thank you.
That 1:40 a.m., that's winter, which is what we're talking about. But just to clarify, right?
Yeah.
It's different during the other season.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so what we have here for you is just,
So not picking me up.
Thanks.
okay. What we have on this slide is some options of how we could augment that winter service plan that we typically do. And staff, I'll tell you, at this point is recommending option 2, but we wanted to have an alternative if we could go out to the public and get their feedback and make sure we hadn't, painted ourselves into just one option if the other was preferred. So as you can see, we've highlighted the first 2 lines here on this chart, and that's because this would be a new route that we would recommend adding that would service Richardson Flat Park and Ride. The Park and Ride has not been serviced in any winter that I've been here, and so this would be new to the public. What you see on the first part of the table is a 20-minute service option of frequency. 2 different buses. One would take people to Park City Mountain, one would take people to Deer Valley. And it shows you the scheduled hours that we would plan to run it through the day of 17 hours. So good, significant service. When you see the service hours, there's more hours there because it's not necessarily one bus just running all day. So we adjust the frequency to meet the peak demand. And the cost that you're seeing on the right is in addition to what we have budgeted. Okay, so that was not accounted for in this year's budget. Now, as you go on to the red, the green, the blue, the yellow, we have budgeted for those routes, but this would be to augment those routes and step up the frequency from 30 to 20 minutes. So there is an additional cost. And then microtransit is also an additional cost. It's a little trickier though, because we did assume $500,000 in this year's budget for microtransit. But the quotes we're getting are looking like there may be an additional $350,000 depending on how much of the area we end up serving with microtransit. So we've accounted for that here. And then we do, in both of these options, want to take the 40 bronze to microtransit. That, will save us some money from running the bronze, but it still obviously costs money to run the microtransit service. There's some changes from the last time we came here to propose that. The service would be run actually through the county with VIA. And so there would be an app involved. I know that was a big hang up for everyone last time. We didn't have an app. So that would be an enhancement. As you look at option 2, same thing, let's add Richardson Flat service, but this would be a higher frequency. And staff recommends the higher frequency because that's kind of a tolerance that people have for riding a bus. If it's every 15 minutes, doesn't sound too bad. Every 20, you're kind of in that zone of, I don't know if I'll go there. And then, of course, stepping up the frequency on the green would also be recommended in that option. The blue, and then both options, as I said, contain microtransit and the change to the bronze. So we would have to go back in and ask for the budget to be reopened to either account for the 1.4 or 1.7 million in addition to what we already have to accomplish this.
Can I ask you for how did you come up with 17 hours? I'm just curious. So it would be like if the workforce came in starting at 6 a.m. and then you're assuming that some of the public that's parking there would stay through dinner on Main Street?
Right, the public and the employees. So.
Yeah.
Then would citywide go out there till 1:40? So
not to Richardson's. It would do its typical routing.
Couple other questions. I'll hold the opinion stuff for later. Microtransit. So are you proposing that we serve PC Heights in addition to running the Richardson route, or would we serve it through there and take it off the microtransit line?
I think we had a couple of different options there. This one is counting for servicing it with micro and not with the route and the costing, if I'm correct.
Right. So if we run the Richardson flat, that would be an option to take Park City Heights off the table for microtransit. And if we don't run the Richardson flat, then we think we probably would need Park City Heights to be covered with the microtransit. So it's kind of, we have the option there.
Understood. Thanks. Then with the buses, increased frequency to 20 minutes. So the difference is what, the red and the yellow between the two options?
Correct. Yeah, those routes would remain under option 2 at 30 minutes.
And maybe this is the next slide, but if we could make sure we hit on the reasons why you might think, well, what I would assume is you think those are moderate value if they're in one option and not the other. So just understanding that a little bit.
Yeah, and this is a little bit of an a la carte. We can, move down the red and blue or whatever down to the option 2. So it's a little bit of, a la carte that way. The reason, it's kind of counterintuitive because the 2 green, 3 blue are kind of some of the ones that didn't look like they needed help. And the reasoning is if we do have Richardson flat running, we feel like that would help out the red and the yellow with capacity because we think that they were overwhelmed with the high school and stuff like that. And the other thing would be that if we have that microtransit piece in there, that would now increase the frequency for bringing people to the 2 green and 3 blue. So there's not a wait, from coming from the microtransit to the fixed route system. So that would increase that frequency, whereas Prospector Square already has some pretty good frequency with both Richardson and the red and the yellow. So we feel like, and the teal. So we feel like there's enough frequency in Prospector where maybe we could bump it up in the Park Mill Staines area to help with microtransit bringing people to that fixed route system.
Sorry. Can you elaborate a little more on Thanes? I mean, are we including Thanes into Aspen Springs, or we're just including Thanes that's not on a route already? Are we removing any of the route of Thanes?
Correct. So we're mostly looking at north of Thanes Canyon Drive as being included in microtransit. So
no, so that is Aspen Springs?
Yeah.
Okay, so we would be including all of that area. Great. Okay.
And I just wanted to verify. So the way microtransit works is they're not taking people, for the most part, all the way to their destination. Like you said, it would be taking people from Upper Park Meadows and potentially Aspen Springs to the closest bus stop or to the most frequented bus stop, I'm guessing, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
We wanted to show you, just give you an idea of what the performance looks like during the winter season. And what this graph represents is each of the routes and their performance. And so how frequently are these buses on time to their stop? And looking at the 3 lower lines, the red, the yellow, and the green, those are the ones that are the most impacted and that miss their stops the most often. And as we dug into this, just trying to put some information together that would be meaningful to you, I'm hoping it is, but there's a lot to it. And so the next slide is a chart. And what we wanted to do is just show what's happening on a given day. And So on the left side, you see the performance, which is the on time. The right side is the speed limit, and this is on a city street. And then each of the green bars represents on time, the frequency that those buses are on time. When you look at the AM peak, we call it, which is from 7:30 to 9:30. And then in the PM, it starts to drop around 2:30 until 5:30. Each of those times, you can see where the on-time performance of the bus starts to go down. And the reason for that is you start to see the vehicle speeds on the left, which is about 7 miles an hour on that city street. And that's when the speeds are supposed to be 25 miles an hour. And seeing this information is really what shined a light on Richardson Flat, is recognizing that we need to pull more cars off the road because we have more in the city than the roads can handle. So creating some capacity off-site where these cars could go, and then we can take transit in. That would be able to provide opportunity for us to increase the average flow closer to the speed limit. And so that's with the dip in those shows where the loops are missed by the bus. And that's where we start to see the greatest problems. It wouldn't help us at all if we wanted to add more buses to the system to try to increase the performance. All that would do was add more congestion. So that's kind of the logic how we were backing into this. And so for transit, the recommendations is, like Kim was saying, option 2 with a 15-minute frequency, which is a price tag of $1.7 million. With that, we recognize there's a lot of outreach that still needs to happen, and just connect with the community to see where they're at with microtransit. We know that's a new system. It's going to be a pilot that we want to test and see how well it works in the city and how well it's embraced. And also with microtransit, we're using the resources from High Valley Transit. So that way they can stand up the microtransit and get it operating in time for the winter season. And so our question for you is, where's the council at in terms of supporting this for us to continue to move forward and to continue to refine these options that we've identified for you this evening, and to increase services and to start up a microtransit pilot for the city? Yeah, Becca.
In addition to the cost, do we have the additional 9 buses, and do we feel confident that we'll be able to staff the additional buses and the additional services?
That's a great question. And so,
Did you want me to take that?
please go ahead.
Yes, we do, because, we had quite a large fleet, even though we did contribute 5 buses to the county. It is definitely maximizing the use of our fleet. We still have the new buses coming in. That has been bumped to December at this time frame. And but even without those, we should have enough buses to accomplish this. As far as staffing, I'm still optimistic that we will have enough. But I'll admit it's a fight. We have to be very aggressive in trying to get our staff. The additional wages definitely helped. It has satisfied our current workforce for sure. But yeah, we need to hit it hard, and I believe we'll make our goal, but I can't promise at this time.
How many people does it take to fulfill those? I don't know, what is it, like 80 additional hours? Is it just two? It's got to be more than 2 full-time people because there's so many routes.
Yeah, we're looking at like an additional 24 operators.
Additional 80 a day. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
24. Okay.
I'm curious about the outreach plans for our Spanish-speaking population. Can you talk about those a little bit, please?
That's a great question. I think that we'll have to work that in. Right now, we've only identified where the locations are that we want to connect with the community, but we'll have to take that into consideration to make sure we include them as part of that outreach.
Do you have something you want to add?
Oh, come on in.
Hello, my name is Andy. I am the Transit Community Outreach and Marketing Coordinator. And so, Spanish language outreach is definitely something we're targeting. We have a lot of kind of what we've found with the short range transit plan is that finding Spanish speaking events and attending those and tabling is a really good way to, way to reach people where they're at. The surveys and all of the information will be posted in English and Spanish, and will be posted throughout our transit system, which is where a lot of our current, Spanish speaking riders find a lot of information. And so, that's definitely a consideration, and we will outline it in our outreach plans.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I would add you guys do a good job of doing it both in Spanish and English to the businesses too, when you bring in the new information.
Can we flip back to the options slide? That might help inform the question you're asking. I mean, do we want to get into that? I can just give you my opinion on this now.
Sure, please.
So, I think taking your recommendation on increased frequency for the existing routes makes a lot of sense to me, right? Because of we don't just want to increase frequency and then have more buses stuck in traffic. That doesn't get us anything. And how it works with the whole system, I think, is important. So, if you're saying you think there's marginal value and it's an additional budget request, I'd probably lean away from it. If you say that the other routes that you're recommending would be increased value and worth trying, then I'd probably follow your recommendation there too. I know there are some community concerns on narrow streets around safety, especially ones without sidewalks and all that, where there's people walking with skis and two buses trying to pass each other. And I think that'll probably come out when we have some public outreach, and we should really pay some attention to that and make sure we don't create an unsafe situation for folks. The microtransit, to answer that previous question, I personally think it makes sense if you'd recommend it from a network perspective to serve Park City Heights with the Richardson Flat bus instead of adding micro there. The frequency to Richardson, this one I have a little more trouble with. And I guess my opinion would hinge a bit on what the resorts are going to do in that space. Because essentially we're standing up a shuttle to bring skiers into the city with the hypothesis that would take cars off the road. And I'm not sure that's the case, right? I'm not sure it's not a situation of more is more. Now, I'm absolutely willing to try it, but we're talking pretty big numbers here, and to the point of staffing and equipment and wear and tear and all that. I'd like to hear what the plan is there from a contribution perspective, and also what the resorts do in the space of helping us forecast demand, and how that plays into our model on frequency and whatnot.
Ryan, do you want to weigh in?
Sure. Yeah.
So- go ahead.
Oh, you talking to me, Ryan?
Yeah, you, Ryan, but Matt, did you want to respond? Okay, go ahead, Ryan.
Sure. Jeremy and I have had the chance to preview this, a bit, and great work by the team. I would say there's a much broader team than you're seeing there in Chambers that worked on this. And so thanks to everybody who really listened to council and put together this plan while also working on the short range transportation plan, long range transportation plan. So appreciate that effort. So pretty much ditto to Jeremy. I really would love to find a way to enable that 15-minute frequency beyond, I think, just what we're doing in terms of serving winter operations this year. I think we're sort of piloting the feasibility of a park and ride. If we provide a great park and ride with the right frequency, that's a success factor for park and rides that we heard. Will they ride it? And so I'd hate to stand up a park and ride, do the public outreach, go to the trouble, have it at 20 minutes, and now we'll have a question at the end of the season. Well, did it not work or did it work? Because there's a 20 minutes instead of 15. If we'd only done it at 15, people would have ridden it. So I'd love to find a way to make that 15-minute work. That's the one thing I'd add.
Thanks. Max?
If only we had a more convenient park and ride to use.
Yeah.
But considering we're working with a park and ride in the middle of nowhere with no services, I'm leaning toward option 2. And yeah, I agree with Ryan. Like, if we're going to do something, let's try and do it the best we can with what we have. Definitely want to see where the resorts come in and how they're going to participate. I have a hard time seeing 700 cars getting parked out in the middle of nowhere and not getting caught in that little 2-lane traffic coming out of Park City Heights. So we'll just have to see how this thing all goes. Yeah, so that's it for me.
At one point in time, I'd heard that perhaps some portable restrooms and maybe a food truck would be made available out there. Is that still sort of on the table?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Thank you. Becca.
Yeah, I know several years ago we started that Ride On program, and there were lots of incentives offered by the resorts and other Main Street businesses. And will that program apply to this park and ride as well for getting people on buses? And is that another thing that we will be doing, partnering with resorts and businesses to incentivize people taking this? Or are you guys kind of looking back and starting that from scratch, or is that still kind of around?
The Ride Be Good program?
Yeah. Weren't there incentives like you could get different things in business?
Here comes Andy.
Yeah.
Andy has the best details, but yes, it's maybe I'll just stay up here. It is fine. Yeah, so we're definitely still utilizing that. And anytime we put a program or like an incentive or a challenge together, we can choose which incentives to promote or which transit modes to promote. So like if we wanted to encourage people to park here, we could, give people a couple extra points for parking there and taking the bus in. So we can definitely include that. And we're also looking into what things we can do as far as like a tri-transit week out there. So there's definitely different things that we're considering as part of that Ride On platform.
Okay. Do you have other comments?
Are we, the express lanes would be in effect, right? So these buses would come out of Richardson Flat and use the express lane all the way to the high school. Is that the plan? So there's an incentive from a time perspective there.
That's correct.
Okay. Do we have that answer on resort contribution? Because I mean, I'd love to answer your question. I feel like I just can't, and I don't want to get too far down this process and then say, well, we're going to have to absorb $1.5 million of taxpayer money for the skier shuttle.
We have heard from one of the resorts that they're going to have their employees come in from Richardson Flat. And so they said that they would use 50 to 100 of the spaces there. So we do have that commitment right now.
Is there a financial commitment?
There is a financial commitment. They were looking at funding their own shuttles, but with the options that we've provided, they said they could use those options and bring their people in.
Do we have an amount, or are we not at the amount stage yet?
We're not quite at the amount stage yet.
Okay.
Tana.
I had a couple questions. The first one being, if the bus is at like 85% capacity, will it just skip the high school? I mean, I'm wondering, like, if we fill it, does it just go? Or do you stop and say, no one else? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, the operator should stop, but still, if no one gets off, let the public that's waiting know that they cannot board at that time. I have to say I'm pretty amazed how people are willing to get close in a bus. So we seem to make it work, but yeah, for safety reasons, we would limit it at some point.
Okay, I'm optimistic it will be full. And then I just had a question about when we do the public outreach, when we're saying door to door, I mean, is that every home in Park City, or are you talking about just the homes that are now on microtransit?
Yeah, so we are sending postcards out to every address, but door to door would be targeted at areas that have significant proposed impacts. So places like where, potentially the 40 bronze could be replaced by microtransit or new areas that we're serving. So yeah, that would be just targeted at areas with significant changes. Yeah.
Okay.
Can I just add one
Sure.
thing? Matt Dias, city manager, I want to congratulate the team. As you said, they've done a tremendous amount of work. But because I'm the manager, I feel like I also have to be a little bit of the wet blanket in that, operationally, it's incredibly difficult, complex system to run. And this last winter, this team went to the end of the earth to try not to miss routes. We had a lot of drivers that came down with COVID and sickness and had trouble getting up here during weather from Salt Lake City. And so, this plan tries to respond to the input that you gave us during your retreat and throughout the winter last year. The other thing that's, I would say, the other trouble with this plan long term is this is really a 1-year plan. This plan is dependent upon fund balance. So we're using one-time money to beta test some of these routes and additional levels of service in a one-time fashion. But by doing that, we have to dip into our fund balance. So one-time funds to beta test this system to see what works and doesn't work. But it's probably not possible long term without a new revenue source to run this level of service in this fashion year after year after year. So I think we're committed to it and we have the resources to do it in the short term. We know you desire it and the community desires it and a tremendous amount of work has been done. But long term, we are going to have to figure something out. I was reminded the other day, never do something once you don't want to do for the rest of your life. So we are stepping into the fray here of making this commitment. And if people love it, we hope they love it. To Councilmember Dickey's point, we hope that they use the service, but it is going to create a commitment moving forward. We're going to have to find a way to fund it.
Mm-hmm. Once the bus goes to the high school, if it was going to is it going to go Bonanza or is everything headed to Park Ave or Park Ave or Kearns and then
Currently, we have 2 separate routes coming from Richardson Flat. One would service the Park City Resort and one would service Main Street, Deer Valley. The one going to the resort, we currently have it planned to go over to Park Ave, but that's, definitely on the table to change it to go Bonanza. I know Bonanza sometimes is better. I personally have driven it and it's faster to go Bonanza. But by going to the Park Ave condos or the Fresh Market area there, it would help with a 10 white coming in. There are a lot of passengers that have to transfer to get up to the resort. And so that would allow that to be an easier transfer from the 10 white to get up to the resort if we had that service come over there. So that's one consideration there. The other route, we definitely would do Bonanza and up Deer Valley Drive to make that quicker right there.
So just to put a bow on my comments, because I feel like I left them hanging a bit into our city manager's comments. I mean, personally, I'm out on spending $1.5 million of Park City taxpayer money without a significant resort contribution. I just think that's silly and irresponsible spending. So I'd need that answer before I could voice my support or not support. I think it's a great idea. I'd love to do it, but what that magic number is, I don't know.
Okay. So I think council's given you some direction on the enhanced transit services. Council, do you support contracting with High Valley Transit for a microtransit pilot?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Ryan? Yes, got a thumbs up there. The proposed route changes and microtransit footprint. We okay with that?
Yes. Well, I'll stick to the previous comment.
Sure. Ryan, I got a thumbs up there. Okay.
Yes.
And the last question that you have up here comes back to parking. I'm looking at my slide, not yours. I'm sorry. And we'll do that on September 1st when we discuss parking. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else you need from us?
Your Honor, we did want to give a quick update on the resort operations planning and work we've been doing with the resorts. We can bring that back at another date if you want. I can do it very quickly.
If you can do it quickly, that's great.
How much time will you give?
4 minutes.
I told her to do it. Again, just a quick update. We've been working diligently with the resorts and meeting with them on a regular cadence. To Jeremy's point, this is where we'd love any expectations you have for either city staff or the resorts. I think that kind of clarity, Jeremy, is very helpful for us. This isn't intended to be a dialogue with the resorts. They're here.
they're listening. We don't have enough time, so that'll preclude that. That's probably a good thing. Again, a summary of the problem. We had emergency public safety problems in our neighborhoods in and around the resorts, inadequate response times, or at least ones we're not comfortable with. The impacts, again, tying back to your goals, resident quality of life, speeding, congestion, traffic, safety for kids and dogs. Transit's been stuck in traffic, the skier experience, our brand is a community. And then the public expense, the public lift, the policy problems, the ongoing debate, the input on you guys. It's been heavy and hard. So we in the budget process, you all approved almost $1 million, gave us some more tools to figure out how to remedy it, how to improve it, how to make it better. The areas of focus we've defined or described swim lanes, systemic. How do we get and access the resort? What does a circulation plan at the resort look like? Can we improve it? Can we make pedestrians more safe? Can we have the ped crossings not block cars? Can we improve, as you just talked about, transit satellite parking? The parking presentation at a later date is going to talk all about how we're going to improve parking systems both at the resort base and their parking lots, and how we can refine and minimize impacts in and around the neighborhoods, both from an enforcement standpoint, sign standpoint. Second swim lane is our communications. We acknowledge that both the city and likely the resorts, there's a lot of room for improvement on informing our guests, informing our residents, and informing our employees where they should go. Where's the best place for them to be? Where's it going to be better for them to be out of the way and have a better experience and not be late to work and those kind of things? And we all have a part in that. That's one of our swim lanes that our teams will be working with their teams to improve. And then the implementation, at the end of the day, we made a big positive change last February. We refined it as the winter got better. Transit times improved. We should all be congratulated, but your expectation during the budget process was clear. Lots of room for improvement. You expect improvement. The community expects improvement. So that operations plan will be better. But we have to staff it. The resort's committed to that. And obviously you've committed to that. The equipment we need to do it needs to be ordered. Again, we're meeting with these guys weekly. We're refining the plan. We're getting better. We'll all be back in probably October to show you what the detail is on that. But we're also going to improve data and performance. We'll talk about that on my next slide. But Jeremy, to your point, the cost reimbursements out there. The resorts that we worked with, they've continued to show a willingness to pay their way for the services the city provided last year. I think that's a good sign. But again, I think everybody expects continued improvements. So quickly, I'll go through these. Again, the neighborhood first stuff. We're working on a program for regulatory signs in neighborhoods that will limit access. It'll change the Google map. You're going to see more parking restrictions and better enforcement. You're going to see more stop signs in neighborhoods, slowing things down, driver feedback signs. And then we're having a heavy lift, weekly meetings on the resort operations. So data-driven performance metrics. We're going to be able to count cars, we hope, moving into these parking lots. That'll inform our VMS signs. That should tell you on the highway, further out from the resort, where you should go and where you shouldn't go. Dynamic circulation patterns, they might be one way. We were going to build on what we brought last year. We think we can deliver transit priority, both in the ingress and the egress, get those buses through so it's a more appealing option. Better drop and load. I think we can create systems where if one part of our system gets so congested it doesn't feel safe or the operations are failing, that we can continue to improve the system in and around that so that the state highways or other roads will be a better, more viable option to continue to have places to park, feel safe in. I think one really important one, and Matt or John Robertson, it's the second to the last bullet, it's the UDOT special event systems. The engineering team and part of the transportation team has been meeting with UDOT regularly, and they are now willing to roll out kind of like an event peak day system for us. So before we're kind of stuck in this bureaucratic limited system, they're now going to treat these peak days like special events, which is going to make it more nimble. The systems can be more nimble to flush cars out or have the intersections function differently. We're going to be able to have different VMS messaging. Those are going to be all big improvements to where we've been in the past. So bringing UDOT to the table as the backbone should make a significant substantive difference. The last bullet, the resort parking management updates. The resorts are here. They're not ready yet. They're still working on refining whether they are or not going to do a reservation system. That'll be a work in progress. That's something we're ready to talk about with you later. We should know here in the next, probably 4 to 6 weeks what they're doing. They're still figuring it out. I wish I could report more. we're optimistic that'll happen. We think that'll make a substantive and meaningful change to the quality of user experience and reduce some of the acute impacts of that morning load in particular. So really, again, we don't have any specific policy questions. It's more of if there's significant expectations that you have for staff at the resorts, now would be a good time to try to help us with some of those. So that was quick. But
It was more than 4 minutes.
I know, I can see your face. I'm sorry.
Okay, we do need to move along here. Council, do you have any last comments, being clear in your expectations for staff and our resort partners?
You talked about the traffic counts. Is that data the resorts share with us, or we have to set up our own infrastructure to capture that?
Thanks for asking. One of the great things that we're fully aligned on is establishing like what I call a data dashboard. So there's shared performance metrics that are data-based that we can look at and say that has indicated good performance or bad performance. So
where's the source of data? Like, are we all collaborating and sharing, or is that a TBD thing?
So we're working with UDOT right now to get data stations on the UDOT right away. And then we've also identified locations within the city where we need more data. And what we're looking at is a couple of options. One, being able to bring the data back to our TOC, or running the data through their management center and then back to us. And then we're looking at a system so that it could come back to us so that we could use it to make dynamic decisions. There's infrastructure out there so that depending on the number of cars or the length of the queue, that it could trigger a response. Either it could turn on a VMS sign or notify someone within the city.
So I think to answer your question directly from an expectation perspective, I would hope that we're collaborating and that everyone's being open with their data so that we're not spending money to set up redundant infrastructure. I heard that was a thing. I don't know if it still is.
And we're trying to make use of UDOT data where they have it available and then just supplementing it. And the thing about the data stations that we're looking at is they're relatively, in my mind, inexpensive. You know, we can do a half a mile for about $10,000 to $15,000. And so we can put those segments throughout the city.
Go for it, Ryan.
Yeah, regarding expectations, I guess I'd want to be clear that I do have the expectation that we'll see paid reserve parking at Park City.
Uh-oh.
Mountain Resort this winter. I think all of our plans. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah, you blanked out for a minute there.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, just that paid reserve parking to me is an input into everything we've talked about. It's
You've frozen again.
The input into the winter transportation plan. It's the input into ours that comes in and never finds a spot. It's an input into a parking conversation question that's in the staff report. So I know as one member of council, it's absolutely my expectation that that the resort will follow through with that commitment.
Okay. Thanks. Tamma.
I would like to see the resorts figure out a texting solution for when their parking is full. I think that that's something that they should be doing versus the city. So if we can implement something where they can text out to whoever signed up for text alerts that their parking is full, that would be great.
Oh, apologies. Let me add one point. Because we need to have this conversation. I know, but when we talk about financial contribution too, I want to make sure we're very clear on grant funding versus tax revenue funding, and not taking credit for funding that's not truly generated by the operation.
Okay, Becca.
I'm good. I know working back on September 1st and October 6th, I look forward to continued discussion and public feedback.
Okay, Max.
No, it's good.
Great job, team. Thank you. It's so obvious how much work has gone into this and is continuing to go on with this. I'm really excited and encouraged about the depth of conversations with our resort partners. And it's wonderful to have everybody at the table as we're figuring this out before the snow flies. So thanks. Okay, we're now going to move along to appointments for the Planning Commission. This has been quite a long process. And I just want to make a few comments as we go into this. You know, appointments of our fellow citizens to our boards and commissions are considered to be one of the highest honors of any elected official's duties. But it's also one of the most difficult. I can't tell you how many hours of council advice I've gotten as we've considered these candidates. As a former Planning Commission appointee, as a former council member who was tasked with the advice and consent responsibility, and now as mayor, there are few, if any, obligations that I have undertaken with more focused deliberation and the interest of the whole community at the forefront. I'm proud of the history of Park City mayors and council members who have always put the balanced interest of the community ahead of political patronage or acute politics of the day. I put forth this nomination list with the aspiration to perpetuate that balance so that the Planning Commission may continue to serve its critical role in administering our land management code fairly and for the entire community. I really want to thank all 10 of the candidates for the time you took to apply. The application requires a lot of thought, and it would be easy to just kind of blow it off, but the answers that we got from the candidates were very thorough and obviously very thoughtful. I know it's a nerve-wracking process, and I can't express my gratitude enough to the candidates for being part of the process here. And to the council, I thank you for also being real engaged in the process, and again, for the hours of advice that you've given me over the last week. The process for tonight will be that I will read out one of the candidates I'm nominating, as well as the term length. We're going to be filling a 1-year term, a 3-year term, and 2 4-year terms this evening. I will then ask for a motion and a second, and as with any other vote, it will take a majority of council for that nomination to go through. And all these terms will begin with the first Planning Commission meeting in August. Anybody have any questions before we get going? No? Okay. Then I recommend to the council that we reappoint Planning Commission member John Kenworthy to a 1-year term. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion that we appoint John Kenworthy to 1-year term on planning.
Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
Nay.
Nay, not with my integrity intact.
Motion carries. We'll move on then to Planning Commission member Laura Susser, reappoint her to a 3-year term on the Planning Commission. Do I have a motion?
I'll move to reappoint Commissioner Susser to a 3-year term.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
Nay.
Okay. Then we will move on to appoint John Frontero to a 4-year term. Do I have a motion?
Your Honor, I move we appoint John Frontero to a 4-year term.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 It's unanimous. And we'll move on to appoint Brian Markkanen. I'm sorry if I butchered your last name. I never can pronounce it right. To a 4-year term. Is there a motion?
I move we appoint Brian Markkanen to a 4-year term.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
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 Okay, motion does not carry. I have spent 5 years sitting on the Planning Commission, and I was so fortunate during that entire time to have amazing commissioners sitting next to me that had experience in various areas that I did not. You know, I had someone very involved in construction. I had a planner. I had an architect that I could look to. I could call on Sunday afternoon when I was reading my packet and capitalize on their expertise. We have lost that expertise with the expiration of the terms of Doug Tim as well as John Phillips. I would like to propose to the council, since we will have to go back out and reopen applications, that during August, staff looks at amending our code for the Planning Commission to require that at least one of the seats be occupied by a member with expertise in one of the fields, and we have to come up with what those fields are, whether that's, you know, construction or architecture or planning or whatever, and that would come as part of that code change. It would be my recommendation that that code change proposal would go to the Planning Commission, hopefully while we're on break in August, and that it would come back to the council on September 1st, which then would allow us to reopen applications for this fourth seat in September. What do you think of that? Comments?
I would agree with that strongly. I think there should likely maybe be 2 seats with some sort of technical advice. I think that 2 different positions. I think we have that in place for our Historical Preservation Board, and I know that it's been very helpful that they have some certifications required and some different job requirements. And I also believe that our Planning Commission asked for some feedback, and I would like an opportunity to be able to give that feedback when we have that discussion about who we are looking to appoint and some of the behaviors we're seeing in hearing about on Planning Commission.
Okay. Other comments?
Yeah, so Historical Preservation Board has 4 different categories. I don't know if we need 4, but it is possibly an option, and I believe there's 7, 8 on 8. 7. Okay, so 3 don't have to fit into that category, but 4 do. And we did get quite a few applications, so I think it's a good idea to do that.
Okay. Ryan?
Yeah, sorry, I'm moving around for my connection. Yeah, I support that. I think that's a good idea to chew through. You know, there's a balance. I'm always wanting to make sure that we have a broad pool of applicants to choose from, and mindful that I would have flunked the test on the general plan versus the plat versus the CCNRs when I applied, and I turned into a decent planning commissioner. But I think worth looking at, and really worth looking at, you know, trying to put together a really consensus-driven process that leads us to a good candidate to fill the slot with.
Okay.
Yeah, I fully support the idea of having professionals on our planning commission that can advise in the work that we do there. You know, with the obvious warning that it's a small town. Everybody who's a professional in this town has worked on a number of different projects, and you're always going to have somebody who may have some perceived conflict in their past. So we're going to have to get over that hurdle and understand that sometimes people are not the company they work for or whatever. We may have a real hard time filling those seats considering the bar set today.
And also fewer people who are working are able to move into our community. It's just gotten harder and harder for people who work in contracting and building and development to afford to live here.
Okay. Jeremy?
Yeah, absolutely supportive. I'll echo what's been said.
Okay. Then, Mr. Dias, I will be happy to, you know, help staff however I can with kind of getting this ready to move forward. Thank you. Okay, then let's move on to communications and disclosures from the council and staff. Jeremy, why don't you start?
Okay, I'll keep it quick. Just echo the sentiments that were spoken about just now and thank everyone who's been part of the process. And I'll say this, I was out of town the past 3 days, and whenever I leave this place and come back, it reminds me how great it is. I'll just leave it at that. We live in a special place.
I'm just going to do one quote from Warren Buffett because I'm the quote person here. In looking for people to hire, look for 3 qualities: integrity, intelligence, and energy. And if they don't have the first, the other 2 will kill you.
Ryan?
Nothing from me. Thanks.
Okay. Becca?
I'm good. Thank you. I just want to get us out of here, but I'm going to do a big shout out. This weekend is the Springer Tournée. It's the Nordic Combine event, and my nephew Donovan's competing tonight, but it goes on all weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and it's some of the best athletes in Nordic Combine. So I encourage everyone, if you have a chance, it's free at UOP, and go check out some of these amazing athletes in our community.
And I just want to remind everyone that council will be giving our residents a break from us in August. The council will be taking a recess. We will not be meeting in the month of August. Many of us will be in and out of town, but please continue to reach out to us. And I want to remind folks that on Saturday morning, Councilmember Rubel and I will be on the deck at Deer Valley Cafe and just hosting a mayor and council in the neighborhood. We hope you come by and have a cup of coffee and a donut or whatever with us, and just kind of share what you're thinking about, what you're happy with, what you're concerned about. And we always love those events. So with that, I want to thank our city recorder, Michelle Kellogg, for the effort she put into what I believe. The minutes? That's what I was going into.
Oh, sorry about that.
I'm like, what did I miss? Yeah, I think it's a record 31-page minutes. But thank you. I know it took a long time, and I really appreciate all the work you did. So the final thing on our agenda tonight is the consideration to approve the 31-page minutes from June 23rd, 2022. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes?
No. I'll make a motion to approve all 31 pages of the minutes from June 23rd, 2022.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
With that, thank you. With
Thanks,
that,
Kat.
we're adjourned, and I'll see you in September.